Lyra Vela could barely remember what warmth felt like. The air inside her cell was stale, thick with the sharp tang of recycled oxygen and the faint, sickly scent of burning circuitry. The metal floor beneath her was frigid, numbing her legs where she sat curled against the wall. Her once pristine robes, woven from the soft silken fibers of her homeworld, were now stiff with dried blood and grime. A deep bruise stretched along her ribs from where one of the guards had struck her days ago. Or had it been weeks? Time had become meaningless in this metal prison. The energy field surrounding her cell hummed softly, a near-invisible barrier of crackling blue light that made the air feel charged, heavy. Whenever she moved too close, the static nipped at her skin like a living thing, warning her against escape. She had learned that lesson early. Her first attempt had sent a surge of energy through her limbs so violent that her vision had blackened for hours. So she sat, and she waited for her captors to sell her to some distant, faceless buyer. Waited for the moment her identity would be erased, her name reduced to a number in a ledger. Waited for death. She had not been weak before the ambush, before the betrayal, before the cold shackles had locked around her wrists and torn her from the home she had sworn to protect. Lyra Vela was Miriathan, a daughter of the Emerald Moons, born under twin suns, raised in the noble houses of her people. Her kind were known for their elegance, their wisdom, their long lifespans, and rich culture. Once, she had been a diplomat, a keeper of peace between the stars, her voice carrying the weight of centuries-old treaties. But to the galaxy's black markets, she was nothing more than a rare commodity. Her green skin, smooth and luminous under the right light, marked her as an exotic prize. The long, silky strands of her black hair, which had once been braided with silver beads to signify her rank, now hung in tangled waves down her back. Her violet eyes, once filled with purpose, were dull from exhaustion. The Oro then Syndicate had taken her. Ruthless slavers and war profiteers, they had struck in the dead of night, tearing her from her ship before her guards could react. Her people's treaties, their diplomacy, their carefully woven alliances, none of it had mattered. Not when the enemy struck from the shadows with the intent to profit from her captivity. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. She had vowed not to break, not to give them the satisfaction of seeing her weep. But as the days dragged on, as hope withered, she wondered how much longer she could last. Then the alarm screamed. A deep, pulsing wail flooded the corridors, followed by the sharp, echoing blasts of gunfire. The ship trembled, metal groaning as explosions thundered through its hull. Distant shouting erupted, frantic voices barking orders over the intercom. This wasn't a standard attack. This was slaughter. Lyra Vela pressed herself against the cell wall, her breath shallow. Through the energy bars, she caught glimpses of movement, shadows flickering in the flashing red emergency lights. Then, heavy footsteps. Steady, unrelenting. Not Syndicate, someone else. And then, he stepped into view. A human. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, his battle-worn armor streaked with soot and blood. His dark hair was damp with sweat, matted against his forehead, a fresh gash above his brow dripping red down his temple. He moved like a man who had been fighting for hours, his chest rising and falling with measured breaths, muscles taut with exertion, but his grip on his weapon remained firm. His gaze locked onto hers. Dark eyes, sharp and assessing, took in her caged form. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, without a word, he strode toward the control panel beside her cell and drew a plasma blade from his belt. With a single, precise slash, he cut through the panel, sending a shower of sparks across the floor. The energy field flickered, then died. The door hissed open. Lyra Vela didn't move. This was not one of her captors. But that did not mean he was her savior. The human exhaled sharply, shifting his weight. "You waiting for an invitation?" His voice was rough, edged with exhaustion, but steady. Lyra Vela hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run. And yet, she remained rooted to the spot, her pulse hammering in her throat. He took a step closer. "Look, lady, I don't know what the hell they wanted with you. but this ship is going down in flames. He jerked his chin toward the distant explosions. Unless you want to burn with it, move. Still, she hesitated. Something flickered across his face, impatience, then something softer. Understanding. His voice lowered. You want to live? She swallowed. Then, with great effort, forced her legs to move. The moment she stepped forward, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist, firm but not cruel. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. Stay close, he ordered. I didn't come all this way just to lose you now. She barely had time to react before the ceiling above them exploded. A shock wave knocked her backward, heat searing across her face. The ship lurched violently, sending debris raining down from the upper decks. The human yanked her forward, shielding her with his body as flaming wreckage crashed where she had been standing seconds before. A guttural snarl echoed through the smoke. Lyra Vela's blood ran cold. The Syndicate wasn't finished yet. From the far end of the corridor, armored enforcers emerged, weapons raised. Their cybernetic implants gleamed under the emergency lights, red lenses scanning for targets. The lead soldier, a towering brute with twin ion rifles strapped to his arms, let out a sharp metallic hiss. Kill the human, he growled. The girl stays. The human warrior's grip on her wrist tightened. Yeah. He exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Good luck with that. Then, in one fluid motion, he shoved her behind him, just as the gunfire began. Lyra Vela barely had time to process what happened next. The human moved with brutal efficiency, weaving between blasts of plasma with an almost instinctive grace. He wasn't just fast, he was relentless, his every strike precise, every movement calculated for maximum destruction. He drove his blade into the nearest attacker, spun, and tore a rifle from another's grip before snapping his neck with a sickening crunch. A stolen ion pistol discharged in his hand, dropping two more before they could react. In less than 10 seconds, the corridor was silent again. Lyra Vela's breath came in short, uneven bursts. The human turned back to her, chest still rising and falling from exertion. You still breathing? She nodded numbly. Good. He extended a hand. Because we're not done yet. Lyra Vela stared at him, then at the bodies at his feet. This man was dangerous, ruthless, but as the alarm screamed, as the ship burned around them, she knew one thing for certain. If she wanted to survive, she had to trust him. So she took his hand, and they ran. The ship was falling apart. Flames spewed from shattered bulkheads, sending thick black smoke curling through the corridors. Sirens blared, their shrill wails mingling with the distant, sporadic bursts of gunfire. The air reeked of scorched metal and burning flesh. Lyra Vela ran, her bare feet pounding against the cold floor, the human warrior's grip firm around her wrist as he pulled her forward. She had no idea who he was or why he was here, but he was her only way out. A deafening explosion tore through the hallway behind them, the shockwave knocking her off balance. She stumbled, barely catching herself before she hit the ground. The human didn't stop. He yanked her back to her feet without hesitation. Move, he barked. She obeyed. There was no time for questions, no time to demand answers. Her lungs burned as they sprinted through the smoke-filled corridors, dodging debris and the occasional syndicate enforcer unlucky enough to cross their path. The human took them down effortlessly, his movements swift and lethal. A blade to the throat, a shot between the eyes, a crushed windpipe. Efficient, merciless. Lyra Vela had never seen a human fight before. Their kind had a reputation, wild, unpredictable, driven by an almost primal instinct. She had dismissed those stories as exaggerations, myths spun to paint them as more formidable than they truly were. She had been wrong. Where is your ship? She finally managed between ragged breaths. Docking bay, he answered, voice clipped. Got a blast through security first. The docking bay. That meant they still had to fight their way past the last line of syndicate defenses. Lyra Vela clenched her teeth. They were so close, but not close enough. They rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. A dozen Oro-than syndicate enforcers stood between them and the exit, their weapons raised, their cybernetic eyes gleaming red in the emergency lighting. The largest of them, a towering brute with twin ion cannons grafted to his forearms, stepped forward. "That's far enough," he growled. His voice was guttural, synthetic enhancements distorting the words. His gaze flicked between the human and Lyra Vela. "Turn around, and we might let you live." The human exhaled slowly. He released Lyra Vela's wrist and rolled his shoulders, adjusting his grip on his blade. His posture shifted, weight settling, tension coiling in his stance like a predator sizing up its prey. Lyra Vela took a step back. Then, without warning, the human moved. It was savagery and precision combined, a dance of brutality unlike anything she had witnessed before. He lunged into their ranks, cutting through them like a storm given form. His plasma blade sliced through armor, severing limbs and cauterizing wounds in the same motion. Blood, black, green, red, splattered against the walls. A gunshot rang out, the sharp crack echoing through the corridor. Lyra Vela flinched, expecting pain, but it wasn't hers. The human staggered, a fresh wound blooming across his side. The brute with the ion cannon sneered. "Not so fast, human." Lyra Vela reacted before she could think. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't trained for war. She had spent her life in embassies, in council chambers, negotiating peace between civilizations. She had sworn an oath to protect life, not take it. But right now, none of that mattered. Her fingers found the discarded plasma rifle at her feet. She barely knew how to use the weapon, but instinct guided her. She raised it, aimed at the brute's exposed throat, and fired. The shot burned through flesh and metal alike. The brute let out a gurgling snarl, collapsing as smoke curled from the gaping hole in his neck. The remaining syndicate enforcers hesitated. The human didn't. He finished what she started. And then, just like that, the corridor fell silent. Lyra Vela stood frozen, her pulse hammering. The rifle was still clenched in her trembling hands. She felt sick. The human stepped closer, his dark eyes scanning her face. First time killing someone? She exhaled shakily. It should have felt like a victory. It didn't. "Yes," she admitted. "Better him than you." His tone was neutral, but something in his gaze softened for a fraction of a second. Then, as if deciding not to press the issue, he jerked his chin toward the exit. "Come on, we're running out of time." Lyra Vela forced herself to move, stepping over bodies as they pushed forward. The docking bay was just ahead. Freedom was just ahead. She wasn't ready, but she would not die in a cage. The stolen freighter drifted through the endless void, its engines humming beneath the metal floor. The ship was old, its systems patched together from years of makeshift repairs, and the air inside carried the faint scent of coolant and scorched wiring. Compared to the cold, sterile prison she had just escaped, it was a sanctuary. And yet, Lyra Vela felt no safer than she had in that cage. She sat on the edge of a narrow cot in the cargo hold, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to force her body to relax. Every part of her ached from the escape. The frantic sprinting, the fights, the adrenaline crash that had left her limbs trembling once they were finally off the Syndicate's ship. But she couldn't rest, not yet. Not while she was trapped on a vessel with a man she barely knew. Cedric. That was his name. A human warrior, a killer with sharp eyes and a mouth that curled into a smirk far too easily for someone who had just torn through an entire squad of Syndicate enforcers. He sat across the room, shirt peeled back to reveal a deep gash along his ribs. The wound was fresh, angry, still bleeding sluggishly despite the crude bandage he had pressed to it. Lyra Vela wasn't sure why she kept watching him. Perhaps it was wariness. He had saved her life, but that didn't make him trustworthy. Humans were unpredictable. They fought with an almost reckless abandon, guided by emotions rather than strategy. Her people, the Myriathans, found them crude, primitive even, despite their technological advancements. She had never met a human before Cedric. If she had, perhaps she would have known whether or not to be afraid. He must have felt her gaze because, without looking up, he muttered, "You're staring." She straightened, clearing her throat. "You're still bleeding." Cedric huffed out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, that happens when you get shot. Liar Vela frowned. His tone was too casual for a man who had nearly died less than an hour ago. You should let me treat it. His dark eyes flicked up to meet hers, assessing. I'll live. Not for long if it gets infected. She stood, moving toward him before she could second-guess herself. A wound like that needs proper care. Unless humans have some unnatural resistance to sepsis, I suggest you let me help. Cedric let out a low sigh, leaning his head back against the bulkhead. Fine. Knock yourself out. She knelt beside him, taking the med kit he had tossed onto a nearby crate. It was an old, standard-issue field kit, likely scavenged from one of his previous jobs. As she pulled out a sterilizing cloth, she noticed his eyes on her, watching her hands with quiet curiosity. You know what you're doing? He murmured. Liar Vela didn't look up. I was trained in basic field medicine. Part of the diplomat package. She paused, glancing at him. There was something in his tone. Curiosity, yes, but also something deeper. Something knowing. You assume much about me, Cedric. He smirked. You don't exactly look like a soldier. Not the type to get their hands dirty, anyway. Liar Vela pressed the disinfectant pad to his wound with a little more force than necessary. He hissed, but to his credit, he didn't pull away. I am not a soldier, she admitted. But I was not defenseless either. My people do not believe in war, but that does not mean we are blind to it. Could have fooled me, he muttered. Not many diplomats would have taken a shot like you did back there. She stiffened. The memory of the syndicate enforcer collapsing to the floor, his cybernetic eyes flickering as the life drained out of him, flashed behind her eyelids. I had no choice, she said quietly. Cedric studied her for a long moment. Yeah, you did. Liar Vela's fingers hesitated over the bandage. He didn't say it cruelly. There was no judgment in his voice, but the weight of his words settled over her like a heavy cloak. She finished dressing the wound in silence, securing the bandage tightly. When she finally sat back, she flexed her fingers, trying to shake the residual tremor from them. It will heal cleanly, she said, more for herself than for him. Good to know. He rolled his shoulder, testing the tightness of the wrap, then gave her a sideways look. Guess that makes you a doctor now. Liar Vela tilted her head. Doctor? A nickname, he said with a smirk. Humans like giving them to people. She considered that. My people do not use them. Shame. You'd be fun to nickname. She gave him a flat look. I doubt that. Cedric chuckled. We'll see. Despite herself, she felt the corner of her lips twitch. It faded quickly. She turned her attention toward the cockpit, her thoughts shifting to the inevitable question she had been avoiding. Where are we going? Cedric followed her gaze, his expression darkening. Somewhere safe. I got a few contacts in the outer systems. The moment the first blast hit, Liar Vela knew they were in trouble. The ship lurched violently, alarms blaring through the cockpit. Red emergency lights pulsed in frantic warning, bathing the metal walls in a flickering glow. The impact sent her sprawling against the console, the sharp edge biting into her ribs. Hold on, Cedric shouted, his hands flying over the controls. The second blast struck. The entire ship groaned in protest as the hull took the hit, metal shrieking under the force. The engines sputtered, then roared back to life in a desperate struggle to keep them airborne. Liar Vela gripped the co-pilot's seat, heart pounding. Shields, gone. Cedric's jaw clenched, his fingers white-knuckled around the flight stick. Sons of bitches got a lock on us before I could jump. Outside the viewport, the planet loomed closer, a frozen wasteland of jagged mountains and endless tundra. Their descent was no longer controlled. It was a freefall. The third and final blast sent them spiraling. The ship spun violently, and Liar Vela was thrown against the bulkhead with a force that rattled her bones. Sparks erupted from the ceiling panels, smoke filling the cabin. Cedric cursed, wrestling with the controls, tried to level their descent. Brace for impact. The world tilted. The atmosphere howled around them as they plummeted. The last thing Liar Vela saw before everything blurred into chaos was Cedric's grim expression. Calm, focused, ready for whatever came next. Then, impact. The ship slammed into the ice with a deafening crash, skidding across the frozen ground, tearing through jagged rock and snowdrifts. The violent momentum threw Lyra Vela forward, her vision flashing white as pain erupted through her skull. Then silence. For a long moment, all she could hear was the ringing in her ears, the distant creak of settling wreckage. The ship lay broken and still, half buried in the snow. Lyra Vela forced herself to move, her limbs sluggish, her head pounding. She coughed, inhaling the acrid scent of burning metal. She was alive. That was the first thing. The second thing, Cedric. She twisted, eyes scanning the ruined cockpit. He was slumped over the controls, motionless, blood trickling from a gash above his brow. Panic surged through her. Husband. The word left her lips before she could stop it. She scrambled toward him, fingers shaking as she reached for his pulse. The moment she felt it, steady, strong, relief hit her like a wave. He was alive, but he wouldn't be for long if they stayed here. Lyra Vela sucked in a breath, ignoring the sharp pain in her ribs as she unbuckled Cedric's harness. He groaned as she pulled him upright, his head lolling slightly. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but alert enough. Lyra Vela. His voice was rough, hoarse. You all right? She let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a sigh. You are the one bleeding, and yet you ask if I am all right. A weak smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Guess that means we're both still breathing. The ship gave a metallic groan beneath them, the wreck settling deeper into the ice. They didn't have time. Lyra Vela hooked an arm under Cedric's shoulder, pulling him to his feet. He grunted, swaying slightly, but he didn't argue. He never did. Come on, she murmured. We need to get out of here before they send someone to finish the job. Cedric muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like a curse, but he let her help him. They forced the cockpit door open, stepping out into a world of ice and wind. The storm had not yet arrived, but the sky was heavy with dark clouds, the promise of a blizzard looming on the horizon. The air was thin, frigid, sharp against her lungs. The wreckage stretched behind them, half buried in the snow, smoke still curling from the damaged engines. Lyra Vela tightened her grip on Cedric's arm. We have to move. He nodded, but she could feel the tension in his body, the barely restrained pain. He was hurt worse than he let on. Typical human stubbornness. They trudged forward, each step crunching over the frozen ground. The wind howled through the valley, whipping her hair around her face. Lyra Vela had never been this cold before. She glanced at Cedric. He wasn't wearing enough layers for this kind of weather. His skin was pale beneath the blood, his breaths coming slower. Without a word, she shrugged off his oversized jacket, the one he had thrown over her shoulders 2 nights ago, and pressed it back into his arms. He frowned. You need it. You need it more, she countered. Cedric exhaled, but didn't argue. He pulled the jacket on with stiff movements, then smirked at her. Husband, huh? Lyra Vela stiffened, realizing what she had said in the ship. Oh, don't back out of it now, he teased, voice rough but amused. I kind of like it. She scowled. It is a term of familiarity. His grin widened. So, you're saying you're familiar with me? Lyra Vela rolled her eyes, but the warmth in his voice, even through the exhaustion, even through the pain, made something settle in her chest. They walked in silence for a while, navigating the uneven terrain. The cold was relentless, seeping into her bones. Every step felt heavier, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. Then a sound, distant but distinct. Engines. Lyra Vela tensed. Cedric's posture shifted immediately, all humor gone. His hand went to his sidearm, movements slow but deliberate. A patrol ship. The Syndicate had found them. Lyra Vela's pulse quickened. We cannot outrun them. No, Cedric agreed. His voice was low, steady, but we can make sure they don't find us first. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward an outcropping of ice-covered rock. They pressed themselves against the frozen stone just as the patrol ship roared overhead, its searchlights sweeping across the tundra. Lyra Vela barely breathed. The ship hovered for a long moment, scanning the wreckage in the distance. Then, after what felt like an eternity, It veered off, disappearing into the storm. Cedric exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. Not the welcoming party I was hoping for. Lyra Vela swallowed hard. They weren't safe. Not yet. Cedric turned to her, studying her face. "You're right." She met his gaze, her breath still unsteady. "I will be." His lips quirked. "Good, because I don't plan on dying out here, husband." Lyra Vela groaned, shoving him lightly. He laughed. Asterisk, asterisk, a real, genuine laugh. Asterisk, asterisk, before groaning at the pain it caused his ribs. Despite the danger, despite the exhaustion, despite everything, she found herself smiling. The first scar, the first battle, the first bond neither of them had expected. And somehow, against all odds, they were still standing. Together. The fire burned low, its glow casting flickering shadows against the ice-covered cavern walls. The wind outside had settled into a slow, haunting howl, weaving through the jagged cliffs like a living thing. The cold remained, relentless as ever, seeping through the stone and into their bones. Lyra Vela sat close to the fire, knees drawn to her chest, wrapped in Cedric's oversized jacket. The scent of leather, metal, and something unmistakably him clung to the fabric. It was a ridiculous thing to focus on, considering the circumstances, but exhaustion did strange things to the mind. Across from her, Cedric leaned against the cavern wall, his legs stretched out, his injured side still tightly bandaged. He was quiet, as he often was, but not in a way that suggested peace. His silence was a waiting thing, heavy with unspoken thoughts. His knife scraped against the wet stone in slow, methodical strokes, the rhythmic sound filling the empty space between them. She had watched him do this before. When he wasn't talking, when he was thinking, when he was waiting for something unseen. She should have left him to his thoughts, but the silence between them had stretched too thin. "You have been sharpening that blade for over an hour," she said at last, her voice soft but firm. Cedric didn't look up, didn't realize there was a time limit. "You were thinking about them," she pressed. "The ones who put us here." His hand stilled for just a second before resuming its steady rhythm. "I think about a lot of things." Lyra Vela tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You are planning." That made him pause, just for a moment. Then he set the whetstone aside, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off a weight. His dark eyes met hers, unreadable. "Always." She held his gaze, unblinking. "You do not trust me." "I don't trust anyone." She let that settle between them, watching him carefully. "Yet you saved me. That doesn't mean I trust you." Lyra Vela exhaled, pressing her fingers into the fabric of his jacket. "And yet, you are here, freezing in a cave, bleeding from your ribs, instead of leaving me behind to fend for myself." A dry chuckle escaped him. "Well, when you put it like that, I sound downright noble." Lyra Vela shook her head. Humans were exhausting. She pulled the jacket tighter around herself, shifting closer to the fire. "What will you do when we leave this place?" Cedric's smirk faded. He hesitated, just long enough for her to notice. "Depends." "On what?" He studied her, as if weighing something. "On whether we make it out of here alive." Lyra Vela's jaw tightened. "You doubt that we will." His lips quirked. "You sound offended, Starlight." There was again. That word. That name. She frowned. "Why do you call me that?" Cedric stretched his arms behind his head, looking entirely too pleased with himself. "Because it suits you." "It does not." "Sure it does," he countered. "You're always looking up like the answers are written in the stars. And you've got that whole glow thing going on." He gestured vaguely at her green skin, which shimmered faintly in the firelight. "Starlight fits." Lyra Vela narrowed her eyes. "It is ridiculous." He grinned. "And yet, here we are." She huffed, rolling her eyes. "You are insufferable." His chuckle was quiet, but real. Then he winced as the motion pulled at his bandaged ribs. Instinct kicked in, and before she could stop herself, she was reaching for him. "Let me see," she said. Cedric sighed, but he didn't stop her as she peeled back the bandage. The wound was healing, but the skin was raw, bruised, and irritated from the cold. "This will scar," she murmured. Cedric smirked. "Good. Chicks dig scars." Lyra Vela frowned. I do not understand. He chuckled. It's a human thing. She shook her head, focusing on securing the fresh bandage. You joke too much. And you worry too much, he shot back. Her hand stilled. Someone has to. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Cedric said, You called me husband. Lyra breath caught. She hadn't expected him to bring it up. She quickly turned her attention back to the bandage, pressing the edges firmly to keep it in place. I did no such thing. His smirk widened. Oh, you definitely did. Back in the ship after we crashed. He leaned forward slightly. You said, Husband, wake up. Heat crawled up her neck. She searched for a response, something dismissive, something logical, but her mind betrayed her. I was not thinking clearly. Cedric raised an eyebrow. Oh, so you only call people husband when you're concussed. She exhaled sharply. It is a habit. He grinned. Calling people your husband is a habit? She scowled, knowing she had no way out of this conversation. In my language, the word does not mean what it does to humans. Among my people, it is an instinctive term of trust. It is only given to those who— She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. To those we believe will protect us. The smirk on Cedric's face faded slightly. His expression shifted, not mocking, not teasing, but something quieter. Something real. Huh. Lyra swallowed, forcing herself to meet his gaze. It does not mean I have chosen you as a mate, if that is what you were thinking. The smirk returned, but it wasn't as sharp as before. Didn't say you did. But you believe I'll protect you, huh? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. For the first time since they met, Cedric didn't have a witty remark ready. The fire crackled softly, the only sound between them. The wind outside had picked up again, distant but steady, whispering through the cavern's entrance. Lyra looked away first, her fingers curling into the fabric of his jacket. A name, a promise. She had given him one without realizing it. And now, he had given one in return. The fire had burned low, barely more than glowing embers now. But Lyra hardly noticed the cold. She sat close to Cedric, her hands carefully pressing a fresh bandage against his ribs. His skin was warm beneath her fingertips, a stark contrast to the icy air around them. The silence between them was heavy, filled with something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't like before. Before, she had tended to his wounds because it was necessary, because he was injured, because she owed him for saving her life, because it was simply the logical thing to do. But now she found herself lingering. Her fingers brushed against the firm lines of his torso as she smoothed the bandage into place, and she could feel his gaze on her, steady and unreadable. You're quiet, he murmured, voice rough with exhaustion. So are you, she countered. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Figured I'd let you do all the worrying for once. Lyra huffed, but the amusement in his tone made something tighten in her chest. She pulled away slightly, inspecting her work. The wound is healing well. You will have a scar, but there is no sign of infection. Cedric leaned his head back against the cavern wall, closing his eyes for a moment. Good to know. You should rest. His smirk widened slightly. You're bossy, Starlight. You are stubborn, she shot back. His chuckle was quiet, but real. He shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. Lyra instinctively reached out, her hand resting lightly against his chest to steady him. The moment her palm met his skin, Cedric's eyes flickered open. She meant to pull away. She didn't. His heartbeat was steady beneath her touch, strong and grounding. Her pulse, however, had suddenly become far less reliable. Cedric watched her carefully. She knew she should say something, but the words felt tangled in her throat. Then he spoke. You call me husband again. Lyra froze. She had. She knew she had. The moment she had pulled him from the wreckage, when she had shaken him awake, when she had feared, truly feared, that she might lose him. The word had left her lips without thought, without hesitation. And she had meant it. Her throat felt tight. It is a term of familiarity. Cedric arched an eyebrow. Right. And I suppose you go around calling people that all the time. She swallowed. No. His smirk faded slightly. Then why me? Lyra Vela exhaled slowly, withdrawing her hand, folding it in her lap to keep it from trembling. In my culture, it does not always mean what it does to humans. Yeah, you mentioned that, he said, voice softer now. It's about trust, right? She nodded. And you trust me? Lyra Vela lifted her gaze, locking eyes with him. There was no teasing there anymore, no smug amusement, just quiet sincerity. Yes, she said. The fire crackled, throwing long shadows against the cavern walls. Cedric didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than before. That's dangerous. She frowned. Why? He let out a slow breath, his hand absently tracing the edge of the bandage over his ribs. Because people like me don't get trusted. We don't get to be the safe choice. Lyra Vela's jaw tightened. You keep saying that. I do not know who you are, that you're not a good man. But you saved me. You continue to protect me. You sit here, bleeding and exhausted, yet still find the energy to make sure I am warm. If that is not a man worth trusting, then I do not know what is. He blinked, caught off guard. For the first time since she met him, Cedric seemed uncertain. He shifted slightly, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off a weight. Starlight, you don't. She moved before she could think. Her fingers reached for his jaw, tilting his face toward her before he could look away. His stubble was rough beneath her touch, his skin warm despite the cold air. She saw the moment his breath caught. Then, slowly, carefully, she leaned in and brushed her lips against his. It was hesitant at first, a whisper of a kiss, a question left unspoken. But when Cedric exhaled and pulled her closer, his fingers curling around her waist, the hesitation melted away. His lips were warm, firm, carrying the faint taste of fire and exhaustion. His grip was solid, grounding, like he was afraid to let go. Lyra Vela hadn't known what to expect, but she hadn't expected this. The intensity, the way he kissed like he had nothing to lose, yet everything to hold on to. The way her own body betrayed her, pressing closer instead of pulling away. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her fingertips, steady and strong. And hers was no longer steady at all. The moment stretched, deepened, until finally Cedric pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against hers. His breathing was uneven, matching hers. His lips quirked faintly. So, does this mean I get to keep the title? Lyra Vela groaned, shoving him lightly. You are impossible. His laughter was low and warm, the sound vibrating through her where their bodies were still pressed together. And yet, he murmured, brushing another kiss against her temple. You keep calling me husband. She rolled her eyes, but the corner of her lips twitched upward despite herself. Cedric sighed, leaning back against the rock, keeping one arm loosely around her waist. Get some sleep, Starlight. We move at dawn. Lyra Vela hesitated for only a moment before shifting closer, allowing herself to rest against his side. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt truly warm. And for the first time, she let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, they had a future worth fighting for. The wreckage stood before them, half buried in snow and ice, its metal hull warped and scarred from the crash. It was a miracle the ship had survived at all, let alone with a working engine. But miracles wouldn't get them off this frozen wasteland. Work would. Lyra Vela took a deep breath, bracing against the cold as she followed Cedric toward the broken remains of their last hope. If they couldn't fix this, they would die here. Cedric exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw as he inspected the damage. All right, we're not completely screwed. Just mostly. Lyra Vela shot him a look. Encouraging. I aim to please. He crouched beside a torn section of the hull, running his fingers along the damaged plating. Engines are buried under all this snow. We'll need to clear it out before I can check for damage. Lyra Vela nodded and knelt beside him, scooping icy powder away with her hands. It was slow, grueling work. The cold bit at her fingers, numbing them despite the insulated gloves she wore. Cedric was struggling too, his movements stiff, his breaths heavier than they should have been. She knew why. The wound was slowing him down. She glanced at him. You should rest. Cedric snorted. Yeah, sure. Let me just lie down in the snow and take a nap. Cedric, I'm fine. He forced another chunk of ice aside. Just keep digging. Lyra Vela clenched her jaw but said nothing. It took them nearly an hour to clear the worst of the debris. By the time they finished, her limbs were shaking, her fingers raw. Cedric wasn't faring much better, his forehead slick with sweat despite the freezing temperature. Finally, he stepped back and exhaled. All right, let's see if she's still got a pulse. He pressed his palm against the control panel beside the main engine compartment. The interface flickered weakly, then died. Cedric cursed under his breath. That is not a good sign, Lyra Vela said carefully. No, Starlight, it's not. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes scanning the exposed wires and burned-out conduits. Power cells are fried. We'll need to rewire the entire system before we even think about firing up the thrusters. Lyra Vela frowned. Can it be done? Cedric let out a long breath. I won't lie, it's not going to be easy. I need time, and a hell of a lot of luck. She didn't like relying on luck, but it wasn't as if they had another option. The long night. They worked in near silence. The only sounds the distant howl of the wind and the faint hum of energy sparking from exposed wires. Cedric worked inside the main power core, elbows deep in burnout circuits. Every so often, Lyra Vela heard him mutter something under his breath, mostly curses, occasionally a half-mumbled encouragement to the ship itself, as if speaking to it would keep it from falling apart. Lyra Vela focused on the external repairs, reinforcing weakened sections of the hull and reconnecting fuel lines. The work was slow, methodical, and dangerous. Twice, she nearly slipped on the ice. Once, she lost feeling in her fingers for so long she worried they wouldn't recover. But they kept going, hour after hour, until finally, Cedric let out a victorious whoop from inside the ship. I think we've got something. Lyra Vela climbed into the cockpit, brushing snow from her shoulders. The power cells? Patched together with sheer willpower and a little bit of genius. He smirked, wiping grease from his hands. We've got power, but we're not out of the woods yet. I still need to reboot the thrusters manually. If they don't ignite, we are stranded. Exactly. Lyra Vela took a slow breath. Then let us not fail. Cedric's smirk softened. He reached out, tucking a stray strand of her hair behind her ear. That's the plan, husband. She scowled, swatting his hand away. Work first, joking later. He chuckled, but didn't argue. The final push. The cockpit was dimly lit, screens flickering with unstable energy levels. Cedric strapped into the pilot's seat, fingers moving swiftly over the controls. Lyra Vela settled beside him, eyes scanning the data readouts. Okay, Cedric muttered, flipping a series of switches. We're going to try a cold start. It's risky, but it's our best shot. Lyra Vela's fingers hovered over the auxiliary power controls. On your mark. Cedric inhaled sharply, then nodded. Now, Lyra Vela pressed the command. The ship shuddered violently as power surged through its systems. The thrusters groaned, coughing out a sputtering burst of energy, then died. Lyra Vela's pulse quickened. It is not working. Cedric's jaw clenched. Give it a second. A warning alarm blared across the console. Lyra Vela's fingers flew over the controls. Power levels dropping. If we try again without rerouting. No time, Cedric interrupted. One more shot. She hesitated. Cedric, trust me. Lyra Vela swallowed. Then, slowly, she reached for the ignition switch. Cedric's hand covered hers. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Together, they pressed the command. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a deep, thunderous roar shook the entire ship. The thrusters ignited. Lyra Vela exhaled sharply, her grip tightening on the console as the ship rumbled beneath them. Cedric grinned. Told you. She shook her head. Do not gloat yet. We still have to take off. Cedric's grin widened. Then let's not waste any time. Outside, the wind howled louder, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a death sentence. It felt like a farewell. They weren't trapped anymore. They were going home. The ship lurched violently as it tore through the upper atmosphere, escaping the frozen wasteland that had nearly been their grave. The controls trembled under Cedric's grip warning lights flashing across the console in angry bursts of red. Lyra Vela's heart pounded as she secured the final navigation inputs, her fingers steady despite the chaos around them. "Come on, baby," Cedric muttered under his breath, hands flying over the controls. "Just hold together a little longer." The hull groaned, struggling against the gravity well of the planet. A shudder ran through the ship, the engines sputtering under the immense strain. Lyra Vela clenched her teeth. If the core overheated before they reached open space, they were dead. A warning klaxon blared. "Incoming fire. The Syndicate ship is locking onto us," Lyra Vela warned, scanning the sensors. "Yeah, I noticed," Cedric gritted out. "No shields, no weapons, barely any fuel. Remind me why this was a good idea again." "It was the only idea," she corrected. A blast shot past them, missing by meters. Lyra Vela's stomach tightened as Cedric spun the ship, dodging another volley with seconds to spare. "They're getting closer," she snapped. "Not for long," Cedric growled, gripping the thruster controls. "Hold on." He pushed the engines to full power, forcing the ship into a dizzying climb. The cabin rattled, pressure levels spiking dangerously high. The Syndicate ship stayed on their tail, another blast slicing past the wing. Lyra Vela's hands flew over the console, rerouting auxiliary power to the thrusters. "If we don't jump soon, we won't get another chance." "Working on it," Cedric barked. The ship bucked again as another blast grazed the hull, sending sparks showering across the cockpit. Smoke curled through the air, the acrid scent of burning wires stinging Lyra Vela's nose. She coughed, eyes watering, but didn't stop working. Then, a flicker of blue on the scanner. "Jump coordinates locked," she shouted. Cedric let out a sharp breath. "Hold on to something." He slammed the hyperspace drive activation, and for a split second, everything went still. The sound of the failing engines, the alarms, the Syndicate fire, all of it faded into nothing. Then the universe ripped open. The ship lurched forward, swallowed by a burst of blue-white energy as the stars around them blurred into streaks of light. Lyra Vela felt the pressure shift, gravity twisting for an instant before stabilizing. And then, silence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were their ragged breaths and the low hum of the ship's core stabilizing. The red warning lights flickered, then dimmed, leaving the cockpit bathed in the cool glow of hyperspace. Lyra Vela slumped back in her seat, exhaling. They had done it. Cedric let out a low chuckle, rubbing a hand down his face. "Holy shit." She turned to look at him, brow raised. He grinned, still catching his breath. "We actually made it." She huffed. "You doubted us?" "Always," he admitted. "But somehow, you keep proving me wrong." Lyra Vela shook her head, but a small smile tugged at her lips. She turned her attention back to the console, checking their trajectory. The damage reports were grim. Their ship was barely holding together, fuel reserves dangerously low, but they were alive. "Where are we heading?" Cedric asked, leaning forward. Lyra Vela hesitated. For the first time since their escape, they weren't running for their lives. The question of where next was no longer dictated by necessity, but by choice. "I can contact my people," she said slowly. "Miriatha will grant us sanctuary." Cedric didn't respond immediately. His hands rested on the controls, fingers drumming absently against the console. Lyra Vela studied him, recognizing the tension in his posture. "You do not wish to go," she observed. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not that simple, Starlight. I don't exactly have the best track record with, well, civilized society." "You saved a diplomat," she pointed out. "That should earn you some goodwill." He chuckled. "Or a life sentence, depending on how they feel about mercenaries crashing warships onto their planets." Lyra Vela's lips twitched. "Miriathans do not hold grudges against those who act with honor." "Yeah." He smirked. "And do they consider kissing a diplomat honorable?" Lyra Vela blinked. Heat crept up her neck as the memory of their kiss. The way his hands had settled on her waist, the way he had pulled her close, the way she hadn't wanted to stop, flashed through her mind. She straightened, ignoring the warmth rising to her face. "It is situational." Cedric laughed, leaning back in his seat. Situational? Huh? I'll take that as a yes. She shot him a sharp look, but the teasing glint in his eyes made it difficult to hold onto her glare. Silence settled between them again, softer this time. The hum of hyperspace surrounded them, the ship drifting through the void, untethered for the first time in days. You could come with me, she said suddenly. Cedric turned to her, his expression unreadable. To Miriatha? She nodded. You'll be safe there. He exhaled slowly. And after that, Lyra hesitated. After that, she had spent so long thinking only of survival, of escaping, running, staying alive long enough to see another sunrise. But now, for the first time, she was considering what came next. Not just for her, for them. She met his gaze, her voice quieter now. Wherever we go together. Cedric stared at her, something shifting in his expression. Then, slowly he grinned. Well, when you put it like that, he murmured, reaching out to take her hand. His thumb brushed lightly over her knuckles, rough and warm. Sounds like a plan, wife. Lyra groaned, but didn't pull away. He laughed, shaking his head. You're never living that down, you know? She sighed, but the corner of her lips curled upward. You talk too much, she murmured. Then, before he could say anything else, she leaned in and kissed him. Cedric inhaled sharply against her lips, but recovered quickly, one hand sliding around her waist as he pulled her closer. His other hand tangled in her hair, fingers threading through the dark strands as he deepened the kiss. It was different this time. Not hesitant, not a question. This was an answer, a promise. They parted just enough for their foreheads to touch, their breath mingling in the quiet hum of the ship. Cedric smirked. That mean I officially keep the husband title. Lyra sighed. It means you should shut up and enjoy the moment. His laughter was warm, his arms still secure around her. Outside the viewport, the endless expanse of stars stretched before them, vast and full of possibilities. The first thing Lyra noticed was warmth. For weeks, the cold had been an unwelcome companion, sinking into her bones, making survival a struggle. But now, wrapped in soft sheets and the steady embrace of Cedric's arms, the chill was nothing more than a distant memory. Sunlight streamed through the viewport, casting golden patterns across the smooth metal walls of their borrowed ship. Beyond the glass, a lush planet stretched out before them, green valleys, winding rivers, and endless skies untouched by war. She had forgotten what true peace looked like. A slow, contented sigh escaped her lips as she shifted slightly, feeling the reassuring weight of Cedric beside her. His arm tightened instinctively around her waist, pulling her closer before he let out a sleepy grunt. You're awake, she murmured. Unfortunately, came the lazy reply, voice rough from sleep. Lyra huffed, amused. You would rather be unconscious? Depends, he muttered, his lips brushing against the bare skin of her shoulder. Are we about to have a deep, philosophical conversation about the future? Because if so, I might fake sleep for another hour. Lyra rolled onto her side, propping herself up on one elbow. Her long, dark hair spilled over the sheets as she arched an elegant brow. And what, exactly, would you rather be doing? A slow smirk tugged at Cedric's lips. His fingers traced lazy circles against her hip, his touch warm and familiar. I can think of a few things. She hummed, pretending to consider. Perhaps sparring. Your reflexes have been dulling since we arrived here. He groaned dramatically, dropping his head back onto the pillow. You really know how to ruin a perfect moment, Starlight. Lyra smirked. Perhaps that is my specialty. Cedric's eyes flicked open then, dark and steady as they met hers. But there was something softer in his gaze, something that had not been there in the beginning, something that had not been allowed to exist when they were fighting for their lives. You know, he murmured, his fingers brushing over her collarbone, tracing the faint mark his lips had left on her skin the night before. We've had a lot of bad days together. Lyra's smirk faded slightly. She knew what he meant. Their time together had been forged in blood and fire, filled with too many close calls, too many stolen moments where survival had always been the priority. But now there was no more running. She reached out, her palm resting over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her fingertips. And this is a good one. Cedric exhaled, a slow, contented sound. Yeah, yeah, it is. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of the ship's systems. Then Cedric smirked again, tilting his head slightly. So, since we're having a good day and all, Lyra Vela arched a brow. Yes. He leaned in, voice a husky murmur against her lips. I think you owe your husband a kiss. Lyra Vela huffed in amusement, but the warmth in her chest deepened at the word. Husband. She had never thought she would call someone that. Never thought she would mean it. But she did. She cupped his face, her thumb brushing along his jaw before she closed the distance between them. The kiss was slow, unhurried, filled with all the things neither of them had been able to say when they were running for their lives. Cedric sighed against her mouth, pulling her fully against him. The sheets tangled around their legs as he deepened the kiss, fingers skimming over the bare skin of her back. For once, there was no urgency, no desperation, just them. When they finally parted, Cedric's forehead rested against hers, his breath warm against her lips. So, he murmured, do I officially get to keep the title, or do I still have to fight for it? Lyra Vela smirked, her fingers threading through his hair. You may keep it. For now. That's the best deal I'm getting, huh? Indeed. His laughter rumbled through his chest as he rolled onto his back, taking her with him. She settled against him, head resting on his shoulder, their limbs tangled together beneath the sheets. For a long while, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The weight of their past battles, their scars, the long nights spent watching each other's backs, they were still there. But they did not define this moment. For the first time in a long time, they weren't fighting to survive. For the first time, they had the luxury of a day without fear. And for the first time, they had a future, together.